One standard year had passed since the Galactic Council declared war on humanity, and the Grand Chamber above Vareth Prime had never been so quiet. High Arbiter Selvin stood at the same podium where he had announced the war. But this time, his scales were pale, and his posture carried none of the pride he had displayed 12 months earlier. 9 of the 12 Council species had formally withdrawn from the conflict, leaving only the Kirith, the Vethrani, and the Morith to continue fighting, and they could not continue. Their fleets had been reduced by 40% through attacks. They still could not predict or prevent their economies were collapsing as trade routes became too dangerous. To maintain their populations were beginning to question why they were fighting a war against a species that seemed to be winning without even trying. By unanimous consent of the remaining council members, Selvin said, his voice echoing through the empty sections of the chamber where representatives from withdrawn species had once sat. We hereby announce the cessation of all military operations against the human race. He paused, finding it difficult to speak the words that came next. We recognize human sovereignty over all territories they currently claim, and we agree to pay reparations for damages caused by our initial aggression. And we formally apologize for the unprovoked declaration of war that began this conflict. The chamber was silent. There was no sound of approval or disagreement. There was only the quiet hum of systems keeping the ancient station alive, a holographic display activated. An ambassador, Unibeak, appeared once again in the center of the chamber. She looked exactly as she had 1 year ago. Calm and composed and utterly unafraid. High Arbiter Selvin, she said, the United Earth Government accepts your terms of surrender, and we look forward to establishing peaceful relations with the Council and its member species. Ambassador? Selvin said, his voice barely above a whisper. May I ask you something privately after this session concludes? Una nodded. I will remain available. The formal ceremony ended quickly, and the remaining council members departed to their ships and homeworlds, eager to put the disaster behind them and begin rebuilding what they had lost. Selvin remained in the chamber alone. Waiting within the hour, Ambassador Beak arrived in person, her small shuttle docking at the station, and her even smaller figure walking through the massive corridors that had been built for species much larger than humans. She found Selvin sitting in one of the observation lounges, staring out at the stars that had witnessed 40,000 years of council dominance, and now witnessed its humiliation. You wanted to speak with me, she said. Taking a seat across from him, Selvin turned to face her, and for the first time since the war began, he allowed his exhaustion and confusion to show openly. I need to understand, he said. When I declared war on your species, you laughed at me, and I have spent the past year trying to understand why Una was quiet for a moment, her eyes studying his face the way a scientist might study an interesting specimen. How much do you know about human history? High Arbiter, more than I did a year ago, Selvin admitted. Your diplomat Ji-hoon showed me things that I cannot forget no matter how hard I try. Then you know that we have spent most of our existence fighting each other, Una said. Wars over territory, wars over religion, wars over ideas, wars over resources that could have been shared if we had simply chosen to cooperate. Yes, and it is horrifying. Una smiled, and there was no joy in it. It is horrifying. And it is also why we survived. She leaned forward slightly. When humanity first left Earth and found other species in the galaxy, we were so hopeful. And we thought that surely beings who had achieved interstellar travel would have moved beyond the violence that plagued our history. But you found the Council, Selvin said. We found the Council, Una agreed. And we found that the galaxy was just as cruel and selfish as Earth had ever been. But with better technology, she stood and walked to the observation window, a reflection ghostly against the stars beyond. So we prepared, and for 300 years, Every human government, every military organization, every scientist and strategist and ordinary citizen knew that one day the Council would try to destroy us. But why did you laugh? Selvin asked again. Even if you were prepared, even if you knew you could win, why laugh at a declaration of war? Una turned to face him, and her smile was different now. Warmer and almost kind, because I had spent my entire career waiting for that moment. And my parents spent their careers waiting for it. And their parents before them, and when it finally came, when you finally gave us the speech we had been expecting for generations, I could not help myself. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small book. Its pages worn from handling. This is a gift for you, she said, handing it to Selvin. It is a human history book. Translated into your language, and I suggest you read about places called Vietnam and Finland and Afghanistan. What will I learn from these places? You will learn about small peoples who refused to kneel before empires that should have crushed them. And you will learn why humanity knew with absolute certainty that we would win this war before it even began. Selvin took the book in his lower hands, feeling its weight. We truly never had a chance. Did we? You had a chance, Una said. You could have chosen peace instead of war. And you could have treated us as equals instead of threats. And you could have learned from our history instead of dismissing us as a young and foolish species. She moved toward the door, then paused. The war is over, High Arbiter. And humanity has no interest in revenge or expansion or any of the things you feared we would want. And we just want to build our civilization and live in peace. And if another species threatens you in the future, Una looked back at him with eyes that had seen too much history and knew too much about what her species was capable of. Then we will do what we have always done, she said. We will survive and we will win. And afterward, we will help our enemies rebuild so that we never have to fight them again. She left. And Selvin sat alone with the book in his hands and the weight of understanding finally settling on his shoulders on Earth. 1 year after the war began and ended, life continued as it always had. People worked and loved and raised their children and looked up at the stars without fear. A new species made first contact, having heard stories of the humans who had defeated the Galactic Council. Without conquering a single world, they came seeking alliance, seeking protection, seeking to understand how such a young race could have accomplished what they did. The human ambassador who greeted them smiled warmly and offered them seats at a table that had room for anyone who came in peace. Welcome to Earth, she said. We have been waiting for friends. Far above, the stars looked down on a species that had learned the hardest lessons of survival and chosen to use that knowledge not for conquest but for protection. The galaxy had declared war on humanity, and humanity had laughed because they knew something the galaxy had forgotten. Those who have suffered learn compassion. Those who have fought learn peace. And those who have survived learn that the greatest victory is the one that ends with your enemy becoming your friend. The Council had wanted to teach humanity a lesson in the end. Humanity had taught them instead. High Arbiter Selvin had not slept properly in 3 weeks, and the evidence of his exhaustion showed in the dull color of his scales and the tremor in his upper hands. The war that was supposed to demonstrate Council supremacy had become something else entirely. Something terrible. Reports came in every hour from across Council space, each one worse than the last human strike teams that appeared on the Kirith homeworld of Silver and destroyed the Hall of Ancestors, a building that had stood for 30,000 years and contained the genetic records of every Kirith who had ever lived. The Vethrani eternal flame, a sacred fire that had burned continuously since the founding of the hegemony, had been extinguished by saboteurs who vanished before anyone could respond. The Morath singing stones, crystalline formations that resonated with the collective consciousness of their species, had been shattered in a single night. No. Civilians were harmed in any of these attacks. That was the part that Selvin could not understand. The humans had demonstrated that they could reach the most protected sites on Council homeworlds, could bypass security systems that were supposed to be impenetrable, could strike at the very heart of galactic civilization, and they had chosen to destroy symbols instead of people. It is psychological warfare, his military advisor explained during one of their endless strategy sessions. They are showing us that they could kill millions if they wanted to, but they are choosing not to. And this makes them more terrifying than if they simply bombed our cities. What is the point of terror if they do not follow through? Selvin demanded. The point is to make us imagine what they could do. And imagination is always worse than reality. The Tyranny Collective withdrew from the war first. The breaking point came when a human medical ship appeared in Tyranny space, carrying 3,000 Tyranny children who had been abandoned on a plague world council. Policy had been to quarantine the world and let the plague run its course, sacrificing the children to prevent the disease from spreading to other populations. The humans had somehow learned of the situation, developed a cure in their own laboratories, and delivered both the cure and surviving children to the Tyranny homeworld. They asked for nothing in return. The Tyranny ambassador stood before the council and announced that his species would no longer fight a people who saved their children while the council had been willing to let them die. 4 more species withdrew over the following weeks, each one citing different reasons, but all of them driven by the same realization. Humanity was not fighting this war to conquer or destroy. Humanity was fighting to prove a point. And the point was becoming impossible to ignore on the planet Selvar, in the ruins of the Hall of Ancestors. High Arbiter Selvin received word that a human diplomat had arrived under a flag of truce. The man's name was Ji-Hoon Kang, and he came alone except for a single unarmed shuttle. Selvin met him in what remained of the sacred building, standing among the shattered containers that had once held the genetic legacy of his people. "You destroyed 30,000 years of history," Selvin said, his voice heavy with grief and anger. Ji-Hoon Kang was a tall man with a calm face and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of things he had seen that Selvin could not imagine. "We destroyed a building," Ji-Hoon said. "Your history still exists in every Kirith who lives and breathes and continues your species. And buildings can be rebuilt, but some things cannot. Is that supposed to comfort me?" "No," Ji-Hoon said. "It is supposed to make you think." He walked among the ruins, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. "On Earth, we have a city called Hiroshima, and in the year 1945, by our old calendar, we dropped a weapon on that city that killed 80,000 people in a single moment." Selvin listened despite himself. "We did this to ourselves," Ji-Hoon continued. "Not aliens, not outside enemies, but humans killing humans with a weapon that we invented specifically for that purpose. Why would you tell me this?" Ji-Hoon turned to face the High Arbiter directly. "Because I need you to understand what we are, and what we are capable of, and why you should be grateful that we chose to destroy your hall instead of your cities." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small device that projected images into the air between them. Images of trenches filled with dead soldiers, images of cities reduced to rubble by bombs that fell from the sky, images of camps where humans had systematically murdered millions of their own people for reasons that made no sense to any rational mind. "This is our history," Ji-Hoon said. "This is what humanity learned from thousands of years of fighting each other. And we know what total war looks like because we invented it." Selvin could not look away from the images, even though they made something cold settle in his stomach. "The Council has not fought a real war in 8,000 years," Ji-Hoon said. "Your conflicts are ritualized and limited and almost polite. And you have forgotten what it means to fight without rules. And humans have not forgotten. We have tried very hard to forget, Ji-hoon said. And there was something sad in his voice. We have built laws and institutions and treaties to prevent ourselves from ever returning to the darkness of our past. But the knowledge is still there, passed down through generations. Waiting. He turned off the projector and put it away. You awakened that knowledge when you declared war on us. And now you are seeing only a small fraction of what humanity can do when we feel threatened. What do you want? Selvin asked. Peace, Ji-hoon said simply. We want to be left alone to build our civilization and live our lives. And we do not want your territory or your resources or your submission. And we only want you to stop trying to destroy us. And if we continue the war, Ji-hoon looked at him with eyes that had seen the images he had just shared. Eyes that belonged to a species that had once burned its own world almost to ash. Then we will stop laughing, he said. And you will learn why Earth's history books are written in blood. He handed Selvin a data chip. You have one rotation to give us your answer. I, Arbiter, and I sincerely hope you choose wisely. He walked out of the ruined hall, leaving Selvin alone with the remains of his ancestors and a choice that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Selvin looked at the data chip in his hand. He already knew what his answer would be. He had seen what humans did to each other when they felt they had no choice. He did not want to see what they would. Due to the council, the war was over. He just had to convince the others to accept it. Fleet Commander Doran of the Vethrani hegemony stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Vengeance, watching through the viewing screen as the largest armada in galactic history assembled around him. 340,000 warships from 12 different species filled the space around the border system of Keth-4, their running lights creating a false constellation that stretched across the darkness. It was beautiful in a way that Doran appreciated with his face. Warrior's heart. All fleet commanders. Report ready, his communications officer announced. The combined armada awaits your orders. Fleet Commander. Doran allowed himself a moment of pride before turning to his tactical display. The human colony of New Bazan lay just 3 systems away. A world of 12 million humans who had built their homes on a planet that the Council had never claimed. It would be the first target of the war. A demonstration of Council power that would break human morale before the real campaign even began. Signal all ships, Doran commanded. We jump in standard formation, and upon arrival, we will surround the planet and demand immediate surrender. And if they do not surrender, his second-in-command asked. Doran's scales shifted in the pattern that indicated cold certainty. Then we will reduce their cities to ash and their people to memories. And the rest of humanity will understand what it means to defy the Council. The jump to New Bizan took only moments. The combined fleet transitioning through fold space in a display of coordinated precision that would have impressed any observer. When they emerged in the New Bizan system, Doran expected to find human defense platforms powering up their weapons. He expected desperate communications, begging for time to evacuate civilians. He expected fear. What he found was nothing. The planet hung in space exactly where the intelligence reports had placed it. Its blue oceans and green continents visible even from orbit. But there were no ships, no defense platforms, no communications of any kind. Scan the system, Doran ordered, his voice carrying the first hint of uncertainty he had felt since the war began. Scanning now. Fleet Commander, his sensor officer reported, and then fell silent for a long moment. The planet appears to be evacuated, and I am detecting no human life signs on the surface. Doran stepped closer to the tactical display, his 4 eyes narrowing. That is impossible, because you cannot evacuate 12 million people without someone noticing. The infrastructure remains intact. The sensor officer continued. Cities, power grids, transportation networks. And everything is functioning normally, but there are no people. The other fleet commanders began sending confused messages, asking if this was some kind of human trick or surrender gesture. Doran did not know what to tell them. Send landing parties to investigate, he finally ordered. And keep all ships at battle stations until we understand what is happening here. The landing parties found exactly what the sensors had. Indicated empty cities with lights still burning, automated systems maintaining. Everything from water treatment to traffic signals. Food left on tables, as if people had. Simply vanished in the middle of their meals. But no bodies. No signs of violence. And no indication of where 12 million humans had gone. Doran reported the situation to High Arbiter Selvan, who seemed just as confused as everyone else. Perhaps they fled in terror before our arrival, Selvan suggested over the communication link. Perhaps they knew they could not defend themselves and chose to abandon their world rather than die fighting. Perhaps, Doran said. But something felt wrong in a way he could not explain. Regardless, we have achieved our first objective, Selvan declared. Broadcast the news across the galaxy, and let all species know that the Council has claimed the first human world without firing a single shot. The broadcast went out within hours, and Council citizens across 1,000 worlds celebrated the easy victory. Doran did not celebrate. He kept his ships at battle stations and ordered continuous scanning of the surrounding space. When night fell on the site of New Bizin, facing the bulk of the Council fleet, the attacks began. The first ship to die was a Morris supply vessel, destroyed by a weapon that left no trace and gave no warning. The second was a Kirith communication relay, simply ceasing to exist between one sensor sweep and the next. By morning, 18 ships had been destroyed, and nobody had seen what was killing them. Find them, Doran roared at his tactical officers. They have to be somewhere, but the human attackers were nowhere. They struck from angles that should have been impossible, using ships so small and so quiet that Council sensors registered them only as background radiation. They targeted supply lines and fuel depots and communication relays, never attacking the warships directly, but slowly cutting off the fleet from its support systems. We cannot resupply, Doran's logistics officer reported after the third day. Our fuel reserves are at 60% and falling, and we have lost contact with 4 of our supply convoys. Then we take what we need from the planet, Doran ordered. The planet has been stripped of all fuel and provisions, the officer replied. Whatever they did not take with them, they destroyed before they left. Doran finally understood what had happened. The humans had not fled New Bizin in terror. They had prepared New Bizin as a trap. They had evacuated their people, stripped the world of anything useful, and left behind a shell that looked like a prize worth claiming. And now 340,000 Council ships were stranded in a system with no supplies, no communications, and enemies they could not see. Signal all commands, Doran ordered. We are withdrawing to Keth 4 to regroup and resupply. Fleet Commander. A message is arriving from an unknown source. Doran turned to face the communication display as a simple text message appeared. It contained only one word: run. He stared at that word for a long moment, feeling something he had not felt since he was a hatchling learning to hunt in the shallow waters of his homeworld. He felt like prey. All ships, emergency jump to Keth 4, he commanded. Now, immediately. Do not wait for formation. The fleet began to jump, ships vanishing into fold space as quickly as their drives could charge. But not quickly enough. The human stealth ships emerged from their hiding places and began targeting the fleeing vessels, destroying those that were slowest to escape. By the time the surviving fleet reached Keth 4, they had lost over 2,000 ships, not to battle, not to any engagement they could understand, just gone. Picked off one by enemies they never saw, Doran stood on his bridge and looked out at the reduced fleet around him. They had come to teach humanity a lesson instead. Humanity had taught them something they had forgotten in 8,000 years of peace. This was what war really felt like. This was fear. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council had stood for 40,000 years above the neutral world of Verith Prime. And in all that time, no species had ever laughed at a declaration of war. High Arbiter Selvan of the Kirith Dominion stood at the center of the massive circular room. His forearms folded behind his back as holographic displays flickered around him, showing the faces of representatives from all 12 elder species of the Council. The Vethrani, with their scaled skin and cold eyes, watched from their designated section, while the Marth floated in their atmospheric bubbles, their jellyfish-like bodies pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that indicated serious discussion. The matter before them was simple, and the vote had been unanimous. Humanity had to be dealt with. 300 years, Selvan said, his voice carrying through the translation systems that filled the chamber. 300 years since these creatures crawled out of their single star system. And already they have disrupted everything we have built. He gestured with one of his upper arms, and the star map appeared in the center of the room, showing human territory marked in blue against the vast green expanse of Council space. They offer asylum to species we have rightfully conquered. He continued. They ignore our mandates on territorial expansion, and they have begun trading with worlds that we placed under economic sanction. The Tarani representative, a being that resembled a tall insect with compound eyes that reflected the chamber lights, clicked in agreement. They took in the Volani refugees, the Tarani said. Those creatures belong to us by right of conquest, and the humans simply welcomed them with open arms. They call it compassion. The Vethrani fleet commander Doran said with disgust. They act as though kindness is a strategy. Selvan nodded slowly, his elongated head moving in the way his species used to show deep thought. We have tolerated their existence because we believed they would learn their place, he said. We believed that time would teach them to respect the order of things that they have not learned. And now they must be taught. He raised all four arms in the formal gesture that preceded a declaration of great importance. By unanimous vote of the Galactic Council, representing 12 species and 400 billion souls, we hereby declare war upon the human race and all territories they claim as their own. The chamber erupted in sounds of approval from a dozen different species, each using their own method of showing agreement. Selvan allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before he turned to the communication officer. Connect US to the human ambassador. He commanded. The holographic display shifted, and a new image appeared in the center of the chamber. Ambassador Unibeak was a small woman by human standards, with black hair pulled back in a simple style and eyes that seemed to take in everything without giving anything away. She sat alone in her office on the human diplomatic station, her hands folded on the desk in front of her High Arbiter Selvan. She said in a voice that carried no fear and no surprise, I assume you have something important to tell me. Selvan straightened his posture, enjoying the moment he had waited years to deliver. Ambassador Beak, the Galactic Council has voted unanimously to declare war upon your species, he said. You have until the next cycle to evacuate your diplomatic personnel from Council space, and after that, we will begin military operations against all human territories. He paused, waiting for the reaction he expected. He had seen species receive declarations of war before, and he knew the pattern. Some begged for mercy immediately, falling to their knees or whatever equivalent they possessed and pleading for negotiations. Others responded with anger, making threats they could never fulfill, promising destruction they could never deliver. A few simply went silent, too shocked to respond, their minds unable to process the reality that their Civilization was about to end. Ambassador Beak did none of these things. She picked up the formal declaration document that had been transmitted to her console and read through it carefully, her expression never changing when she finished. She looked up at the assembled council representatives, and she laughed. Not a nervous laugh or a frightened laugh or even an angry laugh. It was genuine amusement. The kind of sound a person might make when they heard a joke they had been waiting for someone to tell. Several council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was not in the pattern, Ambassador, Selvin said, his voice carrying a hint of uncertainty for the first time. Do you understand what I have just told you? Una Beak wiped a tear from her eye and took a breath to compose herself. Yes. High Arbiter, I understand perfectly, she said. The 12 most powerful species in the galaxy have decided to unite against one young race. And you expect me to be afraid? You should be afraid, Doran said, leaning forward in his seat. We command fleets numbering in the hundreds of thousands. And you have perhaps 10,000 ships to your name. I am aware of the numbers, Una said. And there was something in her smile that made Doran sit back again. I will relay your message to Earth. And I am certain our leaders will respond appropriately. What response can you possibly have? The Tyranny representative asked. You are one species against 12. One world against hundreds. We are not one world, Una said. We are one species. And that is a very different thing. She stood from her desk and gave a small bow that was somehow more dismissive than any insult could have been. Thank you for informing us of your intentions. High Arbiter, she said. We appreciate the warning. And we will be ready when your fleets arrive. The transmission ended. Leaving the council chamber in silence, Selvin stood motionless for a long moment before turning to face his colleagues. She laughed at us, the Morith representative said, its body pulsing with colors that indicated confusion and concern. In 10,000 years of delivering such declarations, I have never seen a species laugh. They are insane, Doran said. But his voice lacked the confidence it had held moments before. They must be insane to react this way. Or they know something we do not. The Tyranny said quietly. Selvin raised his hands for silence. It does not matter what they know or think they know, he said. We have the numbers, we have the technology, and we have 40,000 years of civilization behind us. And what do they have but 300 years and one small corner of the galaxy? The council members made sounds of agreement, reassuring themselves with the logic of their position. Humanity was young and small and alone. The war would be over quickly on Earth. In the deep bunker beneath the city of New Geneva, General Taiwan Park received the transmission from Ambassador Beak with a smile that matched her own. They finally did it, he said to the officers gathered around him. Send word to all commands and activate protocol Laughing Wolf. Sir, his aide asked. Should we inform the civilian population? General Park shook his head slowly. Not yet, he said. Let them enjoy their peace for a few more days, because when this is over, the galaxy will never threaten humanity again. He looked up at the star map on the wall, where council territory stretched across 1,000 systems. They think they are the hunters, he said softly. They have no idea what is about to happen. Across human space, in hidden bases and secret stations, ships began to power up their engines. The council had declared war. Earth had been waiting. General Taiwan Park stood before the United Earth Defense Council in the war room that existed 3 kilometers beneath the surface of the Swiss Alps. A room that had been built in secret over 200 years ago for exactly this moment. The officers and political leaders who filled the chamber were calm in a way that would have confused any outside observer. Their species had just received a declaration of war from the 12 most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. And yet nobody was panicking. 340,000 ships, General Park said. pointing to the holographic display that showed the Council's combined military strength. "That is what they are assembling against us, and on paper, we should be terrified." He paused and looked around the room at faces that showed no terror at all. "But we are not on paper, and we are not like them." Defense Minister Sujin Cho leaned forward in her seat, her silver hair catching the light from the displays above. "General, for the benefit of the civilian representatives who may not have received the full briefing, perhaps you should explain why we have been preparing for this war since before any of us were born." Park nodded and changed the display to show a timeline stretching back 3 centuries, when humanity first left Earth and encountered other species. "We were naive," he said. "We thought the galaxy would welcome us as equals, as partners in exploration and discovery, and we were wrong." The display showed images from humanity's early years in space, first contact events that the general public knew only from sanitized history books. "In our first century of interstellar travel, we encountered 17 hostile species," Park continued. "Some attacked us for our resources, others for our territory, and a few simply because they believed younger species should be destroyed before they could become threats. We survived," said Admiral Min Ji-yoon from her seat near the front. "Not because we were stronger or more advanced, but because we fought differently." Park pointed to her in acknowledgement. "Exactly, Admiral. And that difference is what the Council does not understand about us." He changed the display again, this time showing battle footage that most people in the room had never seen footage of human soldiers fighting in conditions that should have killed them, footage of human ships using tactics that made no logical sense until suddenly they made perfect sense, footage of human generals sacrificing entire fleets to achieve objectives that seemed meaningless until the war was won. "The galaxy fights wars with rules," Park said. "They have codes of honor, traditions of engagement, and rituals of combat that go back thousands of years. And these rules make war predictable and limited and almost civilized." He turned off the display entirely, leaving the room lit only by the dim emergency lights along the walls. "Humans do not fight wars with rules," he said into the darkness. "We fight wars to win, and we will do whatever is necessary to achieve victory." The lights came back on, and Park's face was hard as stone. The Council species have not experienced true war in 8,000 years, and their last major conflict was a border dispute that was settled in 11 days with fewer than 10,000 casualties on both sides. He let that number hang in the air. In the 20th century alone, humanity killed over 100 million of our own people in warfare, and we did it with weapons that the Council would consider primitive. Several civilian representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was not the kind of history that was taught in schools anymore. "We learned things from those wars," Park continued. "We learned how to fight in jungles and deserts and frozen wastelands. And we learned guerrilla tactics and psychological warfare and the art of making your enemy fear the very ground beneath their feet." Admiral Yoon stood and walked to stand beside the general. "The Council expects us to meet them in open battle," she said. "They expect fleet engagements in empty space where their numbers will overwhelm us. And they expect us to defend our colonies and stations like good little prey animals waiting to be slaughtered. But we will not do any of those things," Park said, "because we have spent 300 years preparing for this exact scenario." He activated a new display, this one showing the true extent of human military capability, hidden shipyards and asteroid fields, weapons, platforms disguised as mining stations, stealth ships so small and quiet that Council sensors could not detect them, secret bases on worlds the Council did not even know humanity had visited. "Project Laughing Wolf," Park said, "named for an old Earth saying that the sheep does not negotiate with the wolf, and the wolf does not announce its presence to the sheep. Defense Minister Cho stood now as well, her voice carrying the weight of her office. "We are not sheep," she said. "We never were. And now the Council will learn what happens when you declare war on a species that has spent its entire history fighting for survival." One of the civilian representatives, a young man who had been appointed to his position only months before, raised his hand. "General, with respect, are we certain that war is the only option here? Because perhaps negotiation could still prevent the loss of life that will surely follow." Park looked at him without anger or judgment. 3 centuries ago, we tried negotiation, he said. "We offered friendship and trade and cultural exchange. And do you know what we received in return?" The young man shook his head. "The Kirith Dominion enslaved 2 human colony worlds before we could mount a defense. And the Vethrani hegemony experimented on human prisoners to understand our biology. And the Morath Collective simply destroyed any human ship that entered their space without warning or explanation." Park walked closer to the young representative. "We learned then that the galaxy does not respect kindness or reason or diplomacy, and the galaxy respects only strength. And we have been building that strength ever since." He turned back to address the entire room. "This war will not be fought the way the Council expects. And we will not meet their fleets in glorious battle. And we will not defend our colonies with walls of ships waiting to be destroyed." The display changed one final time, showing a map of Council space with hundreds of red markers scattered throughout. "We will strike where they do not expect us. And we will disappear before they can respond. And we will make them fear the darkness between stars." Admiral Yoon smiled. And it was not a pleasant expression. "They think they have declared war on a young and foolish species," she said. "They do not realize they have awakened something that humanity has tried very hard to put to sleep." Park nodded slowly. 200 years ago, we made a promise to ourselves, he said. "We promised that we would never again be victims. And we would never again watch our people be enslaved or experimented upon or destroyed." He looked around the room one final time. "The Council has given us permission to keep that promise. And we will keep it in ways they cannot imagine, across human space." Hidden fleets began to move toward their assigned positions. The first phase of Project Laughing Wolf was about to begin. And somewhere in the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, High Arbiter Selvan was sleeping peacefully, dreaming of easy victory. He would not sleep peacefully for much longer.